Hey everyone, and welcome to the podcast. I'm Brian Beeler. Today we've got Jon Toor on, who's a CMO over at Cloudian, and Cloudian's been around for quite some time now, and one of the first, in my memory, to be after this sort of software-defined object, cloudish sort of storage for the enterprise, and it should be an interesting conversation. Jon, thanks for coming to do this.
Thank you very much, Brian. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so you've been with Cloudian for some time, but I had to I don't really prepare, as anyone that listens to the podcast would know. But I dug deep into the archives to see. We did this review with Cloudian in December of 2015, and at the end I said, Hyperstore brings the power and flexibility of on-premise S3 cloud storage to commodity hardware along with API integrations to make the most of offsite cloud storage. That was 5 years ago. The company's still doing a lot of the same things, but what's new? What's changed in 5 years?
Well, the underlying premise of object storage on-prem still remains the same. We've remained very true to that basic idea. We think that as storage grows, as unstructured data continues to expand 50% per year, the need for that data to be on-prem has continued to grow unabated. And object storage is really the logical platform to keep all that on. Due to its scalability, its ability to be geo-distributed, all the goodness of object storage still applies, and even more so because all the data has grown. So the premise that S3 compatible object storage on-prem is a good thing is still our core mission. And we remain true to that, and it's a business unto itself. Now, having said that, we've expanded the idea of that on a number of different fronts. We've added file capability, we've added Kubernetes capability, we've added some really exciting monitoring and analytics capabilities. So we've done a lot of things around the edges to expand the reach of what we're doing. But that core mission of S3 compatible storage on-prem still remains true today.
Well, I guess we don't need to update the review then. It still stands 5 years later. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because one of your field engineers came out and we looked at, back then, you guys were doing appliances a little bit, and also the pure software defined model where we just ran it on some a couple old Lenovo servers we had that weren't doing anything, and it's just kind of fun to watch the company over all these years grow. But when we started, it was just a little company trying to talk S3, and now the market, not to say you guys haven't done a good job growing the company, but the market's really come and met you where you guys were starting to point. And it's probably, maybe that was intentional, maybe some of it was fortuitous, but it looks like this whole motion of what you're talking about with object is just become so fundamental to almost every other IT vendor out there. They all have a story about this. How do you feel the market has changed, or maybe not, over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I think you hit it right on. I mean, the market has kind of come to us, but that was that was something that was foreseen back in 2011, back when the company was founded. As storage loves standards, right? Everyone wants to revolve around a standard that you can build on, right? Application developers can write to it, IT managers can build infrastructure around it. And the premise back in 2011 was that S3 compatible object storage would become the next standard for enterprise storage. And the reason for that is because of its dominance in the cloud, right? We saw that Amazon was clearly becoming the dominant player there. They had this language that was driving their storage. And as that standard caught hold with all those applications that were being developed for the cloud, ultimately that would spill over into other environments. We've seen the same exact thing play out in other realms. Look at file, for example. I mean, file, the SMB CIFS was not originally developed for enterprise storage. It was developed for PCs. But because Microsoft was so dominant in that arena, that protocol spilled over into everything, and that created an industry, that created NetApp. We expected the same thing, and we still expect the same thing to happen with S3, because Amazon is so dominant in this new arena of cloud storage. We expect that to spill over into everything, including enterprise. Our basic idea is that cloud and on-prem are just two sides of a coin. It doesn't make any sense to think of it as an either or. Am I going to do this or am I going to do that? We see the two things as working together, right? There are some applications that are best suited for the cloud. There are some that are best suited for on-prem. But do you really want to have two completely different operating models for those two environments? Or would you rather see them have a lot of commonality, so you can have applications that go back and forth between the two environments, data that goes back and forth? The commonality, the standard, is really what drives this whole thing. And we said, the standard of S3 is what's coming. That's where the world needs to be, both on-prem and in the cloud. And our bet is that this is going to be, a trend that's going to become stronger and stronger over the next 10 years. And in fact, from 2011 to today, 2020, we've seen that happening, and we really have grown to meet this. So, we've continued to expand our capabilities. If you read the Gartner Critical Capabilities report that just came out a few weeks ago, they rank Cloudian #1 in every use case for object storage. And that really speaks to the development of all the features and underlying functionality and all the pieces we put together to take advantage of this new standard and really help drive it, make it easy for for enterprise customers to deploy, make it scalable, make it cost effective, and make it highly durable.
Yeah, I think part of that too, part of the growth has been the partners, and I want to get into that a little bit too, because you guys have, in part with dozens of companies, maybe more. I've seen you guys show up in conversations with Veeam. I've seen you show up with VMware recently as they've looked at some of their expansion through Tanzu, and so you guys are not just sitting out there and trying to sell an appliance or trying to sell a software license, but the integration with a lot of these other players as they go try to figure out the world in terms of where this sort of bulk storage, and I don't mean that in a derisive sense, but where this bulk storage needs to go live and how you interface with it and get it into the environment rather than just another silo off on its side. But before we get to all of that, go backwards a little bit and talk to me about how customers deploy Cloudian. What does that look like? Is it really, a software-defined first approach? Is it, are you still doing appliances, or are they through partners? What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. We're still doing appliances. It's still very much a part of our business. I mean, we want to sell our product the way the customer wants to buy it. And for a lot of enterprise storage customers, appliances are their preferred model for a whole host of reasons. So, the typical scenario is that a customer looks at us for a specific use case initially, and the kind of the go-to use case for object storage today is backup and archive, and that's a very common starting point for customers. Is that that's my most pressing need, especially right now in this era of ransomware. We've got a backup solution that can protect them from ransomware. And that is huge, right? That solves an immediate pressing need and gets the deployment started. And that's done in conjunction with one of our partners. We do a lot of work with Veeam, Commvault, Rubrik, Veritas. We work with those guys to enable the complete solution so we can protect that data, protect it from ransomware, make it scalable, and provide a cost-effective, rapidly accessible backup target. So in many cases, this is displacing tape, which may be what they're using now for that backup target, or it may be displacing some other disk-based system, which is not as scalable and is far more costly. So that's kind of the starting place. But once the system is in, and the dust has settled. They've proven that it does what we say it does. It's working reliably. At that point, they start looking at other use cases. Hey, how can I use this with big data? We do a lot of work with Splunk. Splunk has a feature called Smart Store, which provides a tiering capability from Splunk into the Cloudian environment. A great use case because the data is still accessible within Splunk. You can still search it. But it's being stored on Cloudian at 70% less cost than keeping that data on a Splunk indexer. So it starts to build new use cases, and they start looking at file. Hey, can I offload file from my NetApp and Isilon into this environment? Can I use it as a secure Dropbox? We've got a partner that does that with us. Can I use it for video surveillance, or in the case of law enforcement body cam data? Pretty much anything you can think of that has a large capacity of data associated with the application, and you need that data to be readily accessible, in an online like format, where you can go search it. The metadata search is built in. That is exactly where we play, and so customers start finding those other use cases. So it starts with backup and archive, and then expands from there. We've got customers now that have got as many as a dozen different use cases running on a single cluster. So when we say this is a private cloud, what that means is it's a single storage environment that can grow essentially limitlessly and be managed from a single location, even if it's spread across multiple locations, just like you would expect from a cloud system. And so customers, take that to heart, and they start using it the same way they would use a cloud. It's just that it's on-prem, behind their own firewall, and far less costly.
Well, so the use cases for what you're doing are not unsimilar to or dissimilar to where we started with cloud in the first place, right? Because backup and recovery was one of the easiest first things to go do there. So that makes sense. From a number one use case perspective for you guys as well. But when you talk about S3 and integration with applications, how much work has to be done at the application layer to be able to integrate with what you're doing? I'm just sort of thinking through, as these use cases expand, what has to happen there from the integration standpoint. And maybe this gets to some of the partner talk, like I know Veeam did some work. I know VMware is doing some work with you, but talk to that a little bit from the application perspective.
Well, yeah. So first of all, whether you're using an S3 based application or a file based application, we work with either one. So about a third of our customers use our file connector, our hyperfile, so they can work with NFS and SMB files. So if the application is written for that, fine. If the application is written for S3, obviously great as well. But we are seeing more and more applications written to S3 because repatriation is real, right? People write things for the cloud, and then they decide that, we really want to deploy that on-prem. And about a third of our customers are running apps right now on Cloudian that were originally run in the cloud. Some of the major video conferencing services are doing that. We've got financial customers that had financial data in the cloud, and they repatriated that on-prem. Manufacturing companies that found that storing vast amounts of data in the cloud was costing them vast amounts of money, so they repatriated that. So we're seeing that applications written for the cloud are moving on-prem. And the other thing we just added, and you already alluded to this, is Kubernetes support. So we now have a Kubernetes operator, so you can run containers-based applications on-prem using Kubernetes and access S3 in your data center just like you would access it in the cloud. So whether you're running file solutions or object solutions, we've got an answer for that. But we are seeing more and more applications written to object as A, they get repatriated. B, Kubernetes support basically says, all your future development will be able to use this S3 environment. And then C, we are seeing more application developers, write to S3. The Splunk Smart Store was a relatively recent addition, and we continue to see our other partners in data management continue to add more and more S3 capability. So it's kind of a combination of a variety of factors that are driving, the growth.
Well, talk about the Kubernetes one a little bit, since we're kind of there at this point. Obviously, at VMworld, they were talking about all sorts of new initiatives there with Tanzu, and I know you guys are a partner on that. What about, it's just kind of funny because Kubernetes is the hot new thing, right? The whole concept of containers over the last 2 or 3 years, and Object has been around for some time and doesn't normally get associated, or maybe in my mind, as where the hot new action is. So it's, when you think about containers and Object, it may not go together quite like peanut butter and jelly to a lot of listeners. So talk about that a little bit, and about your commitment to containers, and why that relationship makes sense, at least more intuitively to you guys than it might to others outside this particular part of the world.
Yeah, I mean, we think that Kubernetes and object storage were made for each other. Think about it. Kubernetes was developed in the cloud, and it was ideally suited for stateless applications where things weren't really drawing on data that was persistent. But when they started using persistent data in the cloud, that data was invariably object data, whether you're talking about Amazon or Google, where Kubernetes came from, or Microsoft. In every case, object storage was the persistent storage behind the applications. And if you think about it, object storage is the only storage that was developed, specifically for, in the cloud environment. Yes, I know it predated cloud with, some systems that came before, but really the growth of object storage has happened in the cloud. So the two things kind of grew up in parallel: Kubernetes in the cloud and object storage in the cloud. And the nice thing about using Kubernetes with object storage is that we're not breaking any rules. If you look at how file storage and block storage work with Kubernetes, it takes some machination, it takes some workarounds to keep from breaking rules about how you're managing that block storage. And people have built businesses, to fill that gap, right? You've got mm-hmm. whole businesses that were built to manage, block storage behind containers, or manage file storage behind containers. And that's great. I mean, that will absolutely persist, and we expect to see growth there as well. But if you look at object storage, what we had to do to make that work with Kubernetes was virtually trivial compared to what you have to do with file storage and block storage, because you're really not breaking any rules. I mean, we're not dependent on IP addresses. We're not dependent on somebody else managing a file system. We are essentially internet connected storage that operates with high level APIs. So the whole thing about Kubernetes is you want high level commands, because then you can abstract the storage layer from the application layer. So that abstraction in object storage is built in. It's something we do every day. The API is how we manage our system every day. It's not something we had to develop just to support Kubernetes. It is what we do, all the time since 2011. Everything we do is via an API. We have to put in a connector to connect a file. So, that is not our native tongue. But if you think about Kubernetes and object storage, that is our native tongue. And we think it's ideally suited for that environment. If you look at what we had to do to build our operator, how simple our operator is to use, how compact it is, it's available for free on GitHub. It's a really lightweight environment. So the other nice thing about this is, unlike other environments, this is something you can download, use very easily. It's quick to deploy, quick to, you can create containers with that operator, destroy them in a moment. It's very easy to use. And once you're into this environment, it's very easy to grow, because you got this multi-tenanted storage environment where you can do the development in a tenant which is is separated off from the operating environment, and then when you want to take these applications into production, it's simply a matter of switching that application over into the production environment, pointing it to the same tenant, or moving it into a tenant that's a production storage environment, and again you've got isolated storage. So we've got a very easy way to grow from a dev environment where you've got self-service in a walled garden where you can use that storage easily without affecting anything else. You can easily move that into a production environment. Again, have a walled off environment with quality of service control, security all built in, and you've got a nice flow from the dev environment to the production environment. And if you want to take that same application into the cloud, well, guess what? That S3 API that you developed on-prem, that same S3 API will now translate into your cloud environment because we have complete compatibility with the Amazon S3 API. So it gives you a tremendous amount of flexibility, in terms of how you're using that object storage up front. It's easy, it's lightweight, our operator is small. It's easy to move it into a production environment because you've now got the ability to wall off that storage, and it's easy to move it into the cloud. So we kind of think it's covering all the bases to make it easy to do this. And by the way, you're not having to add on any layers of management, right? This is the only thing you're adding is the operator, which you can think of as just a cookbook. That's just telling the application how to connect to the storage and what the passwords are, and kind of bundle up a few APIs so you can create buckets and then provision them. But it's really, really lightweight, and so it's simple. It's easy to use. We think it's kind of think it is peanut butter and jelly. We think the two things go together. And so far, our customers that have tried it have been really delighted.
Well, why are you guys so high on VMware then in their initiatives in the Kubernetes space? Why do you think that's going to be the modality for greatest success?
Right. So kind of rewind a year. I mean, we got started with VMware because VMware is the other public cloud, right? So you got the three names that we all know and love, and then you've got this whole host of service providers that provide regional cloud services, and in many cases they're providing sovereign cloud services within a specific country. VMware is the dominant player in that marketplace, and that is a marketplace that's very important to Cloudian. We have hundreds of service providers that use Cloudian as their object storage offering. Many of them are using VMware, so we got together with VMware, and they now sell Cloudian software to that customer base on a consumption model basis. So they can get started with VMware, they can get started with Cloudian, and it's entirely on a consumption basis. So that was how we got going with VMware, and that's been hugely successful. But the second piece that you're referring to was the VMware Cloud Initiative, and it's just a logical stepping stone from the first, because in the first we were going talking with regional cloud providers, cloud service providers about their initiative. In the second one, we're talking to enterprise customers about their initiatives to run containers on-prem to support this kind of next wave of virtualization, which is Kubernetes, to support that on-prem and do it in a very transparent way, which is going to make it easy to move to the cloud. So again, get this portability between these two environments. So as Kubernetes, VMware has adopted this as a key strategy for their company, we've been fortunate to be able to work with them to be one of the suppliers for the underlying object storage to support that.
Well, that's interesting. So as you think about the growth in containers and those workloads being attached to object and ideally Cloudian object storage, from your perspective, as you see more of that going into production, what does that mean then for your performance profile? Because as many think about object being the number one use case for backup, their availability is perhaps the most important factor, where pure speed is just not typically where you want to make the investment in flash or the higher throughput networking or whatever the case may be. But if you're teaching developers in this sort of test dev motion to use this and everything works, and now we're going to go move it to production, the performance requirements seems to be the next question then, of how do we make sure that this class of storage is as good as our traditional block and file or whatever else is in the organization and in the more typical enterprise environment. So how do you guys think about that from a performance standpoint? And maybe it's not just Kubernetes driving that, but that's just where I went as you started to talk about those emerging or high growth workloads.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, performance is certainly a key concern. Everyone's got to be aware of where that data is best going to reside, based on the performance and the scalability requirements for that particular workload. And we definitely see block continuing to coexist with this. That's block storage will maintain the for real time data. Database kind of applications where you're dealing with structured data, that remains part of the landscape. So we think of the on-prem and cloud environments as being mirrors of each other. So in the cloud, you've got EC2 with block storage, and you've got S3 with the object storage, and we see that exact same environment operating in the on-prem world as well. So you've got you're going to have Kubernetes operating with local RAM that's going to continue to provide that high speed storage, usually flash based storage, and then on the object side doing the unstructured data. Now, having said that, though, in that unstructured data side, you're still going to have a variation of requirements in speed, and we can definitely provide just as much performance on-prem as you're going to get in cloud in that same kind of operating environment of object storage. But on-prem, we can offer you a choice of flash. So we have all flash systems, which are about 3 times the performance of our HDD systems. And then we've got HDD systems, which are about one third the cost. So you've got a choice of those two environments, the operating environments, to match whatever you're. And we've got financial customers today, as an example, that are using object storage for the scalability, for the durability, all the things you associate with object storage, except for the cost. They're going more for performance, and those guys are standardizing on flash. And then we've got other environments which are clearly capacity driven and cost driven, and those guys are standardizing on HDD. But we're also expecting to see guys where there's a mix. And so one thing we announced as part of our flash solution is the tiering capability. So you can have data being stored to flash where you get 3 times the performance, but you also have the ability to move data on a policy-based data migration to the HDD system where it can reside at 1/3 the cost. So they're both in the same system. They're both searchable from one location. You don't have to go to 2 systems to look for what you're trying to find. It's still searchable from one location. It's just the data has been the least frequently used data has been tiered off to that HDD environment. So we've got flash systems for the guys that's focused on that. We've got the HDD systems for the guys that are focused on that. But we can also use them together, and we're seeing a lot of interest in that as well. Again, because the workloads are mixed, right? Some people are saying, well, I've got financial workloads and I've also got backup workloads. They're going to have very different requirements. How can you help me accommodate both without adding complexity? I can always do whatever I want as long as I want to add complexity. But if I want to keep things simple and have the best of both worlds, how do I do that? And that's our answer. Is we've got policy-based tiering. Again, operating in a single namespace. And by the way, one thing we haven't really touched on, but that exact same capability applies to the public cloud as well. So that's one thing we see a lot of interest in is storing data on-prem and then using policy-based tiering and replication to use the cloud in conjunction with that on-prem environment. So having those two worlds work together, as opposed to treating them as two distinct things. How can I make them work in concert using the best of both? I can get the performance of on-prem, I can get the cost and the offsite storage of cloud. How can I get that? We make it easy, again, with that exact same tiering capability.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because traditional arrays and even software-defined storage has had this sort of hybrid offering basically since Flash was created. So, Flash spun up all the all-flash array guys, your Nimble and Tagile and those type of things, and then off into the hybrid world. Is there something with object storage that's technically more challenging in a hybrid or a tiered environment, or is it just that the customer base was content with what the hard drive world was giving them for this type of storage?
Yeah, I think they're kind of different applications, because the hybrid you referred to with Nimble and Tagile was solving a little bit of a different problem. It was solving more of that problem of on-prem, right? I want to have my data quickly accessible, but I don't want to pay flash costs for everything. So yes, that's very analogous to what we're doing on-prem. The hybrid cloud thing is a little different though, because the cloud is fulfilling a different set of requirements. It's moving the data offsite. It's potentially moving it into something where you can keep a long-term archive in another location at very low cost, which is also is good. So it may relieve you from having to build another data center. So there's a lot of interesting things that come along with moving data to the cloud that you don't necessarily get just doing a hybrid within a single box. And what's interesting about this is, I think this has been something that customers have been a little slow to evolve into, but we're seeing it now. We're seeing that, as customers think about the cloud and on-prem as being two sides of the IT coin, right? They're not in competition with each other. They are complementary to each other. They're thinking, oh yeah, I can use that cloud for X, and I can use my on-prem for Y. Because the use cases are different, but I can use them together also, right? I can back up my data on-prem and then replicate a copy of that to the cloud. So I've got a copy off-site in a perhaps potentially a cold storage environment that's very low cost. And the other thing that's interesting about this is that when I start thinking about how I can use that cloud storage in different ways, when we replicate or tier data to the cloud, we are storing it in the native format of that cloud. So whether you're moving it to Amazon, Google, or Microsoft, we are storing that data in the cloud and in the native format of that cloud. So what that says is I can do data analysis on that data in the cloud. I can access that data from cloud-based applications, and it will be read and writable just like it was written by the cloud application itself. So this opens up some new possibilities in terms of how you are using cloud for data analysis. For in addition to just archiving, it actually has more possibilities for how you're using the compute capabilities there. And we're seeing customers starting to realize the possibilities of that as well. So when you think about just pure on-prem hybrid versus hybrid into the cloud, they're kind of two different stories, and we see a lot of development still possible in how that hybrid to the cloud really works. And then when you go back to our Kubernetes conversation, now these two worlds really start coming together, because now you're running the same applications on-prem as you're running in the cloud. You can move data back and forth, and you take advantage of that data compatibility between the two environments. It really starts opening up a lot of possibilities for how you start using these two environments, again, as in a complementary way rather than viewing them in a competitive way. And that that is just so exciting. There's so many possibilities for what we can do in the future. And you think about how much data is created on-prem in all kinds of different modalities, whether it be in a factory floor or whether it be in a clinic, or whether it be in a call center, or whether it be in a video production studio. I mean, there is so much data being created on-prem every day. It just makes sense that you have to have robust storage possibilities in your data center to best accommodate the performance, the cost, all the different things that come around with that data that's being created. But on the other hand, you may want to, you have a lot of capabilities in the cloud as well. So you've got data analysis, you've got a lot of cool tools, you've got distribution capabilities, you've got long-term storage that's off-site. I mean, there's a lot of things there too. So how do you make these two things work together? How do you make them operate as one? And that is exactly the premise of what we do. I mean, the company is called Cloudian. Confusingly, since we are on-prem storage, but it's called Cloudian for a reason, and that is because we want to be the mirror of the public cloud, but in your data center, but providing all the same kinds of capabilities, running the same applications, offering the same scalability, offering the same geo-distribution capabilities, providing that on-prem mirror so that everything you're doing in your data center that is retaining data that's being created there and consumed there is convenient there, is local, but you still get the benefit of being able to use all the benefits of the cloud as well. So all the stuff we're talking about in terms of S3, Kubernetes, the data compatibility between the two environments, all of those things are really designed to support that basic premise, which is that we're the on-prem cloud complementing your public cloud environments.
So I've got a couple thoughts there. First is you went through a lot of use cases that include what is now popularly being called the edge, right? And while you're talking about some of these large enterprise data storage issues, the creation, as you appropriately note, is often happening outside of the data center or in the field or whatever. What's the Cloudian story for these edge or remote use cases? Are you seeing customers stand up little clusters there and then replicating back, or what are you guys seeing in those cases?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the clusters are going wherever the data is being created. I mean, we're the standard storage for one of the major automakers, and they're locating Cloudian clusters wherever the data is coming from, whether it be in a wind tunnel, or whether it be in a call center, or whether it be in a design dev location. They're standing up clusters wherever that data is. And the nice thing is that all these clusters operate in a geo-distributed manner, so you can manage the clusters from a single location with a single namespace or multiple namespaces, depending on whatever happens to fit that particular use case. But absolutely, our basic unit is one U high. You don't have to have any more than one of them in a specific location. You can have a cluster which spans multiple locations of one unit each. So these little one U high devices can basically go wherever you need them to, and then network in with everything else that's in the environment. And one thing we've added this year is Hyper IQ, our monitoring and analytics capability, because that networking is such a critical part of our overall infrastructure. Hyper IQ gives us the ability to monitor the entire storage system, including all of that networking. So you can see all those interconnections and make sure that your entire worldwide cluster is operating reliably. It's a different kind of an operating environment than a non-distributed storage, where you've got one box or a few boxes in a data center is a system. Our system, the network is the computer thing from Sun, right? In our case, the network is the storage, and that networking and the storage systems all work together. And Hyper IQ monitors everything, so you can spot problems. But yes, the edge is very much a part of what we do. And as our customers get more sophisticated in their use cases, find more and more uses for this, they're absolutely taking these boxes and deploying them far afield, whether it be, again, a factory floor, a clinic, a production studio. One customer is, they've got storage boxes in a production studio in New York. Other, boxes in a production studio in Los Angeles, and then still more in a separate location in Colorado, where they're maintaining backups of everything. So it all depends on where that data is being created and how they want to manage it. But we can absolutely go wherever the data is, and that's really the point. The data is being created a lot faster than we're creating new bandwidth to move that data around. The ratio is like 2 to 1, right? The rate at which we're creating new data and the acceleration of that is about twice as fast as our creation of bandwidth. So we believe that over time, that data is going to become, the data at the edge is going to tend to want to reside there.
Right.
But ultimately, it's going to depend on the use case, and we will go wherever that data is.
Well, the media and entertainment use case is one that I think is interesting, and that's probably, if backup and archive is number one, I would guess that's probably pretty close to for your use cases, and you can tell me if I'm wrong on that. But we were just talking with somebody last week about this data problem of the footage getting so big now. If they're shooting in 4K, 8K, however many Ks you want, that the files are getting really big, and that they're back to FedExing drives around as the faster way to move, rather than using traditional storage or even cloud storage, because it's just too slow, too cumbersome to get these files out to a distributed production house. As you know, with these things, there's specialists for who makes the shrubs in animated films, and that guy or team lives wherever that team is, and you still have to be able to move things to and from. What do you make of that? Because you guys are knee deep, I'm sure, in the media and entertainment space, and how does your architecture benefit those use cases?
Well, yeah. So it gets back to where the data is being created is obviously where you want to locate the storage, and then as far as moving data around, it all depends on with the timing requirements. And there may be cases absolutely where you just don't have the time to move data over a network. I mean, we're not making the networks necessarily any faster. We can certainly make them more reliable because the S3 API is fundamentally well suited for moving large data over networks. I mean, with multi-part upload, you just got a much more resilient connection than you have if you're just trying to move regular file data. So we can definitely give you a more reliable connection, which is ultimately going to help you move data from point A to point B faster. We have numerous partners in the file acceleration space, such as File Catalyst is in the file acceleration space. But you're absolutely right. If you have to move a petabyte very, very quickly, you still may be better off just putting it on a hard drive and shipping it. But that's typically what our customers are looking at, is they've got a production environment where they've got data resident, and then they've got another location where that data is being stored long term. And typically, the editing and the production is happening in the same location, and then that offsite storage is more of a long-term storage solution. And there, the transfer rate isn't quite so critical, and that's a more typical use case for us. But just getting back to your comment on media and entertainment, yes, that's absolutely a key one for us. But I'll tell you right now, where we're seeing more growth than media and entertainment is actually in areas like government and healthcare, and where we're really seeing what's driving that growth right now is ransomware protection. I mean, these guys are so concerned about what's going on with ransomware. They need a solution which is robust, and that's one area where Object Lock has really come to the rescue, because with object storage, we've got a capability to do worm, right? We can do, it's called object lock in the object storage world. But that provides, healthcare providers, local governments, state governments, federal governments with a storage repository that is immutable. So it protects them from, the data being encrypted by ransomware. And that's actually in the past 9 months become a faster growth area for us than M&E. The M&E has actually seen their production rates, fall off as a result of COVID. But COVID has had the opposite effect on ransomware. COVID has accelerated.
It made more bad guys come out of their basements.
It made it easier for the bad guys to work too, because now when you're trying to phishing is the most common attack vectors. Phishing emails. 70% of ransomware attacks are being created through phishing attacks. And it used to be it would be easy for you to check out the validity of an email. You can just turn to the person next to you and say, "Hey, what about this? Did you know anything about this?" Well, now that person isn't sitting next to you. So how do you check out the validity of things? People are more likely to fall prey, and frankly, they're less likely to hear the warnings, because otherwise people would be talking around the office. Hey, did you hear about the phishing attack, et cetera? Now all that communication has to happen via email, and people don't always read emails. So phishing has become a big deal, and particularly, we've seen it target healthcare. I mean, you've heard about the FBI warning healthcare providers just this week that massive ransomware attacks are targeting the healthcare industry right now. We've been seeing this in state and local government for months now. And why these guys are targeted? Well, they've got a lot of PII. They've got a lot of really, really valuable information. They've got a lot of workers on email, so they've got many potential vectors into that organization. And frankly, they got limited resources to deal with the problem when it occurs. So you go after one of these guys and attack them, and you demand a ransom. Very often that ransom gets paid. These guys are making money on this stuff. It's really criminal. So people are turning to us for solutions. And the great news is that with object lock, you can make that data immutable without adding any extra manpower to how you're having to manage that infrastructure. You don't have to move tapes around. You don't have to manage some kind of separate physical device. You can do it within a disk environment that's completely automated. It works in conjunction with Veeam. It works in conjunction with Commvault. You've got data that's protected from ransomware with essentially no extra work to get that protection. And that's huge. I mean, so that's kind of what we're seeing right now in terms of customers looking for solutions and turning to object storage as the really the best solution in this environment. Ultimately any of the perimeter defenses you put in place, whether they be training of your people or firewalls or server protection, any of those can ultimately be defeated. Obviously, you need to do all those things, because if you get hit by ransomware, you're risking downtime. But you can at least know that your data is protected, and that's ultimately what where the ransom is derived. If you get hit with ransomware and you have downtime because you have to restore data, that's a lot better than being hit with ransomware and then having to pay ransom. Oh, and by the way, you may not get your data back even after you do.
Well, yeah, and even if you're able to recover, so Rick Vanover from Veeam and I did a live cast a couple of weeks back on ransomware, because Veeam's got a lot of thoughts on this, and this immutability concept came up, of course, and is sort of fundamental to the way they look at it. But small healthcare providers are absolutely being targeted, and I don't know that they're more vulnerable, but they're perhaps more reliant on their data. Because what's plan B? Just to stop, close your medical practice until you sort it out. So a lot of times they'll pay, as you say, and normally they'll get their data, but not always. But even if you don't, and you don't have a good plan in place, the guys that we talked to locally that got hit, they spent something like 25, 30 grand to get their data back. So I mean, it's just insane, the fight if you're not ready for it. And like they say, preparation is the key. But gosh, it's just brutal out there dealing with these guys that have been wildly successful. That, as you say, slipping in an email and then slowly starts to reach out and find stuff, and it's quiet at first, and often you don't see it until it's obviously too late, right?
Right, and the thing is, Brian, is it's so easy to have a protection plan in place because you can either work with Cloudian and Veeam. You talked to Rick, we love working with Veeam on this stuff. Or if that complete solution is outside your financial means, we work with service providers who offer that exact same thing as a service. So they will sell you Cloudian and Veeam as a service. To do exactly the same thing, and for smaller data sets, the smaller clinics, that may be the ideal way to go. So whether you're small or large, you've got the capability of having a rock solid solution in place. And like I say, it's not going to prevent necessarily downtime in the event that you have an attack, but it basically says when you recover, which you're going to be able to do much more quickly, you're not going to have to pay any ransom to do it. So you're guaranteed of getting your data back. And whether you're small or large, you've got access to the solution. What is stopping you from going out and taking advantage of that tremendous technology? This is something that kind of really came on the scene in the last year. I mean, we announced our solution with Veeam in February. And, I guess you could say the timing was either horrible or perfect, depending on how you want to look at it, because obviously right after that, we all went into lockdown. But from one standpoint, it was just in time because, the scammers have really taken advantage of this COVID environment to increase their penetration with phishing attacks. These attacks have gotten tremendously sophisticated. They're pulling information off of social media to be very convincing in their attacks. And it's so easy for them to do, but it's also so easy for you to protect yourself. I mean, why would people not do this?
Uncertainty, apprehension, and maybe they've got a partner that doesn't know enough, because it's still, I think when you're in it, it seems obvious, but from the mid-market down, I think that's it can be challenging.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think education is absolutely critical. That's why we're here to help people learn about this. And the FBI issuing this alert this week saying that, hey, this is something that's targeting healthcare providers across America of every size. It's something that people need to be looking for solutions. As I say, we can either help them or we can refer them to one of our service providers that can help smaller scale guys do exactly the same thing for their particular scale of data, but get the same level of protection.
Yeah, that's important. And the as a service model is obviously increasing in popularity. So that's easy to consume for these guys. Mm-hmm. As you think about what you've done by adding file, when was that, by the way, that you added that capability?
2 years ago.
Okay. And so the platform continues to mature and gets you into deals that maybe you weren't considered for before you had some of these things in place, like the flash nodes, like the file support, and certainly with the visibility with your application Hyper IQ. For those that are looking at some of these workloads where they've traditionally been on filers, whether it's ONTAP or Isilon or whatever, what do you need to say to them to get them past any apprehension of going to object? Is there a reluctance there, or anything that's a big challenge for you in terms of the sales process?
No, I don't think it's a challenge. I think it's just understanding the use case. If we're talking with customers all the time about what they're doing, the conversation always starts with what's your use case, what's your application requirements in terms of capacity, what are the requirements in terms of performance, what are your objectives for cost. So once we understand all those things, we can make a great recommendation on how to proceed. Our file solution is obviously object on the back end. That's clear, and as we know that object in terms of latency is greater latency than file systems. In many use cases, that does not make any difference. If latency, if there are, we say if you're accessing things at human-like speeds, or you're typing something on the internet and you expect to have a web page come up, or you expect to see your latest cat photo. If you're operating at human-like speeds, object is going to work just fine. If you're expecting to use this thing like a database, and some file applications are that way, where they're expecting very low latencies, that's not our sweet spot. So we just understand what the customer is doing and where the two things come together. Latency is a good fit. They do have a need for high capacity. They do have a need for low cost. Then we can provide an ideal solution for them. Our Hyperfile basic version is offered at no cost to our customers, so you get exactly the same cost parameters as our underlying object storage. It can run on a VM, so it's not even going to add any compute environments. But this is understanding the use case of the customer. And no, we don't recommend that we are we're 100% replacement for those file environments. NetApp and EMC absolutely have a place where they're operating with lots of users, and latencies have to be very low, and it's a traditional file environment. But we've got a lot of guys who are operating with large files, like video surveillance, for example. Right. Is an example where the files are very large, capacity requirements are through the roof. Cost, is king. You can't afford to spend a bunch of money on this stuff, but retention requirements are long and growing. Right, in 90 days or a year or more in some cases. That's a tremendous file environment. Call centers, where they're recording, voice, and in some cases even video. Another one where retention requirements are long, capacity requirements are through the roof. Video production, a lot of video environments are file. You're going to have large transfers. They're going to happen relatively infrequently. Again, a great environment. So when we find environments like that, we are a perfect fit. Probably a third of our customers are using file and object together today. So it means two-thirds are focused on object. But a third are using file, and in those use cases, it's a great fit.
Yeah, so a lot of those use cases are large scale deployments, especially when you start talking about video files. What's a typical starting point for you guys when you sell into a new customer? A couple petabytes, or is it smaller than that? What does that look like?
So our smallest box is just over 100 terabytes raw, and so our typical deployments are going to be, our typical deployment is going to be probably 1 to 200 terabytes usable at a minimum. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of our starting point, is 100 to 200 terabyte kind of range. Where it really starts getting interesting from a cost and scalability perspective is when you start getting up to in the mid hundreds of terabytes. So I think kind of our sweet spot of things where things start really getting interesting is probably in the 300 or 400 terabyte range, and then of course we go up to we've got a box that's 1.5 petabytes in a single enclosure. So in a typical deployment of that, you're probably going to be looking at 3 to 5 petabytes of usable capacity. So we can span a really, really wide range because we've got 1U devices and 4U devices, and we've got each one has been cost optimized for that particular environment. So they're high density servers. We've tuned precisely the memory and processor capabilities to that particular workload. We've got flash devices now that have far more processor because they're really designed for performance.
Sure.
So we've kind of developed our appliance lineup to fit the customer's requirements at every step of the process. From relatively small by our standards, 100 terabytes, up to the multi-petabyte deployments, and then into flash.
Well, like I said at the beginning, it's been 5 years since we did some hands-on work, and even though not a lot has changed in your mission, the platform has clearly grown over that half decade. So we might have to work with you on getting a couple of those flash boxes in here. But this has been a great conversation. Really appreciate you taking the time, walking us through not just the company, but some of the higher level sort of vision that you guys have for data, and certainly appreciate you being a part of that today. Thank you for your time, Jon.
Thank you, Brian. Real pleasure.